52 episodes, 52 ordinary people, 52 real stories about things that affect overall health. Because there is a lot more that goes into being healthy than food and fitness. Inspiration, support, a new perspective, and knowledge. You'll find that and more here on the Healthability Project.
Hi, and welcome to the Healthability Project. I'm Robin McKenna. Music influences our health and well-being. It's a known fact. We've all had the experience of our moods being lifted or calmed after hearing our favorite band, song, or music genre. There are some of us that are gifted with both the talent of playing and the inspiration to bring the influence of music to others. Here to share how he has seen music influence the health and wellness of children, as well as his own, is Jim Royle. Jim is a Connecticut native. He attended the University of Bridgeport as a percussion and education major. He has studied various aspects of percussion with world-recognized masters such as Max Roach and Alan Dawson. Jim has collaborated on and produced several CDs in the jazz genre. His love of and passion for music has been lifelong and is matched by his desire to pass this love on to future musicians. 38 years ago, Jim started his own business, the Jim Royle Drum Studio. The studio is known for turning out remarkable performers, in part because Jim's programs expose students to the many aspects of percussion. Even the youngest students are given the opportunity to progress from drum set to world, Latin, Afro-Cuban, orchestra, steel drums, timpani, and mallet studies. Jim's name has become synonymous with jazz in the New England club circuit. He is the drummer for the prestigious New England Jazz Ensemble Big Band, and for several years he was part of both the summer faculty for Western Connecticut State and on the prestigious faculty roster for COSA Percussion Workshop, performing in Vermont and Canada. He is the former president of the Connecticut State chapter of the Percussive Arts Society and was honored in 2000 with Chapter President of the Year. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jim. I am so glad to have you as a guest on the Healthability Project.
You're welcome, and it's a pleasure to be here with you to share.
How did music come into your life? How did you end up pursuing it in school? And let's hear about the drum studio.
Okay. So for me, it started at my home. My father played drums, and he did it as a hobby. And say I was in 4th or 5th grade, and there was a drum set in the basement, and I really didn't necessarily take to it at that point. It was there, and he would play incredible records by the great Buddy Rich and all these, so it was floating in the air for me. And then finally in 6th grade, and I share this with all my students, that you want to wait for that aha moment. And there was an aha moment in 6th grade when the band director walked into our classroom and said, look, our snare drummer is moving away. Does anybody play drums? And I just put my hand up. I'm not sure why, only that I had some kind of connection to it. And that was it from that moment. I started lessons, and with my father's high school, friend who was a professional drummer. And from the very moment I said, yes, I wanted to be the best at it. And there was a gift there for sure. And that was the biggest part of the rest of my childhood. It was drumming and music and baseball for me. And that kept me out of, and I grew up in Stamford. We had a wonderful upbringing. But it kept me leveled through my, all my years in middle school and high school. And I thank my father for that. And of course, my mom too, for supporting that. And I thank my father and mother every day on my walk when I go through my thank yous, because he opened up a career for me. He was a blue collar worker, but he instilled the discipline to work hard. And I, for many, many years, wanted to prove to him that I could do that with music where I didn't have to get my hands dirty to get that job done. And I reached that goal. So, and again, that's a mind thing. I wanted it for myself, but I also wanted to prove that no, I can do this. And it's been an incredible ride that continues. So that was the very beginning.
When you threw your hand up in sixth grade, how much drum playing had you done at that point?
It was just hacking around on my father's kit. That was it. There was no private lesson yet. But like I said, for so many of us, that can happen, and it happens in different parts of our lives. But that's the day it happened for me. Oh. And I always tell everyone, be aware of that aha moment, because you don't know when it's going to come, and don't be afraid to make the leap. And I've made tons of leaps throughout my career based on not being fearful of what could happen. Wow. Because you don't know unless you try. That old saying. Right. And so yeah, there was no formal instruction yet.
Wow.
But I knew it was in there.
It's impressive that you learned how to not be fearful about taking leaps at such a young age. Did you realize it at that point, or was it just excitement that?
I think, yeah. So I was in sixth grade, so it was like you're 12, 11, 12. And in today's world, we're talking about health and wellness. Again, going through all these decades of teaching. When I was younger, born in 66, just hit 58, it was a different time. And you were allowed to grow up in a different degree. Mm-hmm. So you weren't thrown everything from the internet and all the expectations and everything so early. So I got to enjoy that time to build that, where, I had my own expectations. My parents didn't push it. Mm-hmm. They would flick the lights in the basement to tell me to stop playing. Like if I played in a practice for hours, they're like, okay, that's enough for today. Where most parents are like, did you practice today? Did you practice today? That was never an issue for me. So, but it concerns me today because so many, of our students, whether they're 8 years old to 18, it's a different mindset and a vibe. Mm-hmm. And it happens all the time. And I try to do my best to balance that for them when they come to see me. Mm-hmm. Because it's beyond the page of what we're trying to do musically. We can learn the notes, we can learn the grooves, we can get you ready for what you have to get ready for, but I also want you to be mentally in a great place. Mm-hmm. Because if we can't get there, then we can't get to the music.
And there's a feeling of pride and I guess purpose and accomplishment that comes along with being able to get to that place to be ready to play. And what an extraordinary feeling for a young kid to experience.
Absolutely. And every time I made the next jump, it fired me to go to the next one, the next one, the next one. I mean, I was playing out professionally before I could drive. I was 14, and my father was driving me to performances. And it just, that's what I knew. And my teacher, who was Lou Gabriel in Stanford, was an incredible beginning. I worked with him for 4 years, and he was just astounded by the way I took it on, where I never wanted to repeat a lesson. And, we were going through curriculum, etc. And I didn't know any other way but to come back and make sure I was prepared so I could go on to the next one. But I matched that with an incredible ear to just sit down and play along to records and get most of what I heard happening. And again, everybody has different gifts. I have students that they don't have a great ear, but they work the technique and the reading, and it comes at a pace. And I have some that are amazing ear players, but they're not great readers. They're more listeners than having to read, and because they struggle putting that together. And that could be all kinds of mental health things that we deal with, which again, when I was young, I didn't know I probably had ADD. Parents were just like, yeah, because I was always jumping and on fire and running and running and running, and I'm still that way. But I didn't go and get diagnosed, but the energy was there, and but I could focus on the music.
Mm-hmm.
I could focus on that task. I was an average at academics. I got it done, but
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get to the music.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my focus was. So, based on what we're talking about today, music for so many can put you into the zone so that you can build the discipline to do everything else. And I use that with students that I know struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Because without a question, it can help.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be your favorite, like math wasn't my favorite, but if you do give it, dig in there for 5 minutes, and if you're struggling, well, then get up. And that was even with drumming. We're working with different masters. If you're working on something and it's totally just ripping you apart and you can't get it, get up and walk away for a few minutes. And it could be 5. It could be go do something else for a while and come back. Sometimes when I would come back, it would just happen organically because your mind needed a chance to just breathe and regroup. And that could be put in everything. So I try to relate music to everything that a student has to get to every day.
Right. Stress management. Subliminal stress management.
Absolutely. I have students that come in and I know it wasn't a good day. I mean, that's a big part of who I became as a teacher, wearing all the different hats, and everyone's well-being again starts when they walk through the door. And I ask them, "How are you doing today?" And I know them really well because I have to know them. And I'm like, okay, but what's really happening today? What really happened today? And again, if someone really doesn't want to share, I'll let it go. But most of the time, it'll be, yeah, this happened. And we'll chat about it for a few minutes and they let it out. It could be something at school, it could be at home, it could be whatever, but then they can actually breathe and their shoulders can drop. And then we can get to the music. Now, Robin, they feel they're in a safe place. And I want them to have that feeling that every week, whether it's a private lesson or you're part of one of our, award-winning ensembles, that you could come to that place and don't worry about what happened at school or what you have to do when you get back home. During that time, let it be something that's filled with joy and fun and creativity and all the things that go with music. We all know we're going to have to go back to the reality of those other things. But for that time, why shouldn't it be something special and awesome?
Right. And just for that individual without the static of life.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So tell us about opening that drum studio. What gave you the idea? What were the driving factors behind that? And how did it go in the beginning?
Wow. Okay. So when I started at University of Bridgeport in 84, 85, another aha moment happened. I'm in percussion ensemble. And during one of the rehearsals, my teacher, who was wonderful, his name is Howard, he's passed, but his name was Howard Zwickler. And he was just wonderful from the day I auditioned through that whole time. But he said, "Hey, the local music store needs a drum set teacher. Is anybody interested?" And once again, I raised my hand up really fast and said, "Yes, I want to do it." That was the beginning of teaching privately, because I went to school originally for music education to be a public school music teacher. But once I started teaching privately, I found this niche of how I enjoyed that even more. And what I saw my other colleagues doing in the classroom that were a little bit ahead of me. And I felt maybe I didn't want to manage that because it was more about managing than it was about music. So in that time at Professional Music Center, which was in Fairfield on Black Rock Turnpike, I was there, I don't know, 5 years, so to speak. And they introduced to me at the end of the season a recital for our students, which I never experienced that as a performer or a teacher, or a student or a teacher. And I thought that was the coolest thing. It was at the Pequot Library, in that beautiful little auditorium. So I had some students that participated, and that started to turn into where my roster grew and grew, and they had to do a separate recital just for me. Because it got so big. And then as I was at UB learning more and more about the extended percussion, I wanted to bring that into what I was teaching, but a small practice room, you can't do it. So whether it's mallet instrument or this or that or whatever, and they did a renovation in that store and gave me a bigger room than anybody. But at some point I knew it was time. So I was 23 and I said, I need to move on from here. And with a little bit of help from my grandfather, my father's father, there was some estate money. And I bought my first house at 23 in Bridgeport, Fairfield line, right off Brooklawn Avenue. And it had a beautiful finished basement. I'm like, that's my studio. That was 1989.
Wow.
And that's where I got to, it just ballooned. And I knew I could do everything that I wanted. And the ensemble started. And, I mean, I don't know how my wife, Allison, put up with it. I mean, 7 days a week.
Wow.
7 days a week, even when the boys were born. My first son was born in 93. But we somehow made all that work. But that was that next chapter of teaching where it really started to be, I wanted to make it about what I believed at Professional Music Center. But when I started the private studio, I knew I could build it into what I really wanted. And so that was about 8 years. And then my son Ryan was getting ready for kindergarten. And we wanted to maybe move to a different town. And so then, what am I going to do now? So the leap for that house, though, let's go back for a second, was immense. Okay, regardless of some of the money I had for a down payment, it was all on me. I had to make that happen. But I knew mentally, I'm the one who has to make it work. My father would make that very clear. It's on you. It's not on me. You got to make it happen. So I was a fiend about reading all the self-help books. And I was like bubbling every day when I woke up about what was next, what I was going to improve, how it was going to be better, how it was going to be unique and special. And not just another kid come and do a drum lesson. I wanted it to be more than that, which included that I was sincerely connected to everyone who walked through that door. You weren't just another person on my roster. And it became a family over these decades of people going through and then other people hearing about that's how we did it. So before we moved, I knew that, I can't build this any bigger than it is. If I want it to be bigger, I need to add someone. That was tough because you can't clone yourself. And if somebody calls and says, I thought I was working with Jim Royle, you know what I mean? Now it's going to be somebody else. So I didn't want it to be just anybody. So my first teacher that I brought on was a student of mine that was just starting at WestCon. And he worked for me part-time teaching, but he went through my curriculum, was in ensembles. He knew what it was all about. So it was a safe place for me that, and it was a little convincing at first, like, that he's not studying with me or she's not studying with me, but it worked out. And then I brought on other former students that came back from college and so forth and studied with me, taught for me for 2 or 3 years or more. And then I would give them that foundation. And if it was their time to leap to the next thing, I was okay with that. As a musician, and a teacher, you're going through different phases of where it takes you, whether it's a different state or performing or whatever. So I was fine with that. So at that point, we built a house in Monroe, where we are currently, and we sold the house in Bridgeport. And then I took on a lease blocks away off of Brooklawn Avenue, where we currently are. It's a 4 store strip, like a little strip mall, whatever you want to call it. And again, frightening. Like, wait a minute, what? You're out of your comfort zone again. I was so scared, but I knew that's what I had to do next. And I knew I could bring other teachers on. So, and I had an incredible mentor at the time, Steve Enty, whose both sons studied with me. And actually, Brian Enty he's my assistant director to this day. He
Wow.
studied with, he was 5,
Hmm.
now 41 years old.
Oh my gosh.
He worked all the way through the program, went to college for music. And as soon as he came back, he started to teach for me, and he's been with me ever since.
Oh.
So, but Steve got me through some of the business stuff, and I went in for the lease. And then from there, I knew I wanted to build it even more. And we built out some more practice rooms. And I would have, at one point, we had at least 4 or 5 teachers teaching, and myself. But I needed to expand it.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that the space next to me was a Chinese ballet dance studio. That was my ensemble room. I mean, I'm like, wow. So I told the owner, I said, when you want out and you want to sell this building, I want in. And the day came.
Huh.
And I bought the building. Another scary thought, but I knew that I could rent out the side spaces, and that could help with the mortgage and the taxes, and I could keep building this.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are. I mean, but those were all mental things I had to get through. And talking about mental health, and I don't mind sharing this because this is real. In my mid-30s, I had some severe anxiety. And this is why I also can help the kids so much, where I had panic attacks. Because everything for me, Robin, was a green light. I didn't see a yellow. I didn't see a red. I just kept, there was performing, teaching, building the business, whatever. And my body finally said, slow down.
Yeah.
Slow down. So, and that took a while, and it was rough with 2 young boys, my wife, trying to get through that. But I worked to be able to manage it. And to this day, I mean, I'm 58 now. I mean, it's been all those years since I worked through that I know how to manage it now.
Wow. Yeah.
And I could pass that on because I think I brought it up that kids are coming in today with severe anxiety and everything else that goes with that. And I don't mind sharing it with them. It's okay. It's okay to have, that you have it, but you're seeking help and talking about it and to get through it and using the music to build your confidence and your stability, and bringing back the joy of something that can help you get through that, whether it's school and your accolades with your music and so forth. You can get through it. So yeah, that's like, well, I experienced that myself. So
that's amazing. I mean, it's 38 years, so you've seen a lot of children come through your program. Are there any specific stories that stick out where you see a kid come in one disposition or at some point is going through something and you see how the drum studio helped them or influenced them to feel better or gain more confidence?
There are many. I mean, there are so many. And sometimes it's going through a stage where you're unbalanced and you just can't get it together. But for some, it could be also where they think music's going to be it. And I never push that on them that I want, I think it'd be great. You're going to be a musician. You're going to be a teacher. You're going to be this to that. That's not up for me to say. They have to, that has to come from within their heart and that they want that. I'll guide them through that. But I've gotten emails and letters over the years from students, and it's when, I don't expect any of it, but when it comes, it's beautiful. And I've got a couple where, and actually it's come full circle. This student of mine, when I bought the first house, he went all the way through the program, did everything, but he went to school for, I think it was architecture. I'm pretty sure that's correct. And he sent me a letter saying, there's no way I would have ever done this and gotten to this goal if I didn't have the foundation that you gave me all those years at the studio.
Wow.
And that came to him. We didn't have a conversation. And that really hit me like, whoa, what? Like, and now his son is studying with me at the studio, he's in eighth grade this year.
Wow.
And he's in ensembles like his dad was. And oh my God, it's so beautiful. Another one just recently, it was last summer, I was performing on the Green in Fairfield with Silver Steel, which is our big steel band, which is all adults. And it started where parents of students wanted to be in a steel band because their kids were. And Brian and I would be like, yeah, okay, you're just talking about that. And eventually they kept saying it. So we finally started a Monday night rehearsal for parents that wanted to play steel pan. Well, that's turned into a real thing where over the summer, that group can have 20 or more performances. Mentally, it helps so many of them who are career people. And then when they come to that Monday night rehearsal, they can let it all go. and they have played at some major performances now. And we're talking, this group's been together for like, it might be somewhere around 15 years now. And this group's about 15, 16 people. It's a big steel band. 2 years ago, they warmed up for Billy Joel at the Greenwich Town Party.
Oh my gosh.
So, and all these different festivals and performances, and boy, are they proud. And if they're having a tough time at work and even at home or whatever, they feel like rock stars on some of these performances. I mean, I've been doing this forever and had the chance to play with major jazz artists, and sometimes you forget what it meant to you at that time, and I don't want to forget what it can mean to them, whether they're the young kids or the adults. So I got off tangent, but we're at the Green, and I'm setting up, and again, it's just my nature. I'm very visual, and I'm always scanning and observant of what's happening around me. And I saw somebody, I'm like, boy, he looks familiar. And we caught eyes, and he walked over. And he goes, you remember who I am? And then I realized who it was. And he goes, I'll just use his son's first name, Evan. And he goes, I want you to know that right now, Evan's working on his second doctorate in neurology in New York City. And blah, 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 blah. And he goes, there's no way he would have done that if he didn't experience what he experienced with you. Now, Evan was a fine student, musician, went to school originally for music, and then changed it over to something with neuroscience, but he put those together. And he was one of the students that eventually the ensemble started to go on tour. Mm-hmm. And the A team goes overseas and somewhere wonderful every other year. His year, we went to Italy on tour. Wow. So there are experiences that, like, well, the kids will say, Jim, I've never done anything like this in my whole life. Like, this is like the best thing I've ever done. And we've gone to China, Ireland, England, Trinidad, it's been amazing. And that could be something that they'll have, that they experience, that they'll never forget. Because one of the things we also do in Trinidad and or Jamaica, we're going to an area where we're teaching other students that are in a spot that they're not getting that same opportunity. And I donated a whole set of steel drums to this remote village in Jamaica with the great reggae artist Mystic Bowie, who lives here also. It's where he grew up. And it's 2 hours up a remote mountain in Jamaica. And now we go up there often, and some of our A team goes with me, and we teach the students about steel drums. But then they teach the kids about their culture on hand drumming. And I could get a student that we're going on a hike or doing whatever, you're in this beautiful nature esque area. They'll say, Jim, I've never done anything like this ever, and this is the best thing I've ever done. Seeing them with those other students and them, having this camaraderie and just oneness, and then they don't want you to leave, that whole thing. Yeah. So how do you ever forget that? You can never forget that. Mm. And if I can offer something like that to them, then I'm whole. Yeah. So it's really turned into some things over these years that, I don't know, it means the world to me. And that's why I still continue to want to do it.
Very inspirational. The experiences these kids walk away from is so inspirational and a driver for so many parts of their lives that are yet to come.
Correct. Right. And they could think back on, go, I could do this. I could do what's next,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they know the studio is always a second home for them, and they could, I just, look, you can reach out to me anytime, and when that happens, and we can chat, so another student of mine, made me think of it, who was an amazing academic student, and he was on the A team. I forget where we went when he was a senior. Maybe it was China, but he checked in with me, say last year, and he sent me a picture. And he goes, "Jim, I still have my steel pan, because some of them will get a steel pan, and his drum set." And he was just brilliant. He goes, "Yeah, very nonchalant." He goes, "Yeah, I'm working at NASA."
Wow.
It doesn't surprise me, but he was saying that, yeah, in my other corner of my life, music is still really important to me.
Wow.
So that's motivating enough for me,
Yeah.
to continue.
So, in speaking about health and wellness, you yourself have just had some experience, health related experience. And how has music helped you in that healing process, or has it?
Oh, it most definitely has. And there are numerous components in here. I was told, from a scan, that there's an aneurysm and we need to deal with it, and your whole world gets flipped. I mean, I've been a rock all these years and never had any major health issue. And right away, I'm thinking about, okay, the studio, all my students that I see every week, ensembles, blah, blah, blah. But I knew that Brian could help me with that. But immediately, I'm like, I have to get someone to cover for me, or a couple of my colleagues. And another former student of mine who went all the way through, he went to China. I called him up and I let him know what was happening. He goes, "Jim, I got this. I got you." And he covered 4 out of the 5 days for me, teaching intact without moving anyone.
Wow.
For 4.5.
Wow.
So I needed to get my mind right before I went in. And I was able to do that. And Brian basically ran everything, because I had open heart surgery. I can't be stressing. I didn't know what it was going to be when I came out, and I kind of bounced back pretty quick, and everybody was like, "Wow, you're doing amazing," and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know. I'm just living this in the moment. But just thinking about wanting to get back to teaching and wanting to get back on the drums that are behind me, I did it a little bit here and there because, you're sore and everything that goes with it. But music propelled me, I think, to get back to, again, not 100%, but more of a normal routine than I would have otherwise. Because sometimes if you don't have something that motivates you, it can affect your recovery. And there's no doubt that the desire to come back to teach and perform. I mean, my first performance was 2 weeks ago at a jazz club at the Waterbury Palace Theater with a group I've been playing with for almost 30 years, the Chris Coogan Quintet. And that was not a gimme gig, as we call it. That was like reading charts, intense, and I needed to bring it. Otherwise, I'm not doing it.
Right.
But it propelled me to start doing 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes practicing. Then I was feeling sore, but okay. But I did that gig 2 or weeks ago, and it was absolutely amazing. It got organic. It came back. I had 1 day off, and then I had another performance with Steel Pan to play, and that went great. And there's no doubt that helped me heal because I had something I wanted to get back to.
Right. Wow. What an extraordinary journey, and so many great messages from this. I don't even know where to begin, but thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You're a living example of the influence of music on overall health and wellness. And it's just remarkable, remarkable. Thank you so much for being with me today. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, the pleasure is mine, and I'm so glad that we we got to meet and talk about this, because the connection is there and it needs to be talked about. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Listeners, if you liked today's episode, please like us, share us, and if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can reach me at thehealthabilityproject@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us today at the Healthability Project. We'd love to hear from you, so please email us your questions, comments, or suggestions, including future guests, to thehealthabilityproject@gmail.com. And please like us, subscribe, and share us with your friends.